In the Gun, episode 121 of your new favorite WVU football podcast. I'm Wesley Euler with the best teammates in the business. We've got the runaway beer truck down the sideline, being Owen Schmidt himself, and the signal caller, Jed Drenning here. And of course, you already know this episode of ITG, brought to you in part by our friends at BetOnline, where the game starts. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice I got a Bruce Irvin jersey on here today, and I know Big O was already giving me grief before we hit the record button here. All right, it's the wrong one now, okay? Because I'm wearing the Seahawks, the old 5-1 Bruce Irvin, the Super Bowl champion Bruce Irvin jersey here. But our guy Bruce, just when we all thought that he was done with his football career, right? I mean, he's getting inducted into the WVU Hall of Fame. He's on the sideline for some of these games. Well, not so fast, my friend, as Lee Corso would say. Big O, Big Bruce, signing with the Detroit Lions this week. He's going to start on the practice squad, but obviously you think he's got a great opportunity to be a part of that active roster down the stretch here. And, you know, for a Lions team that really started to build momentum last year and has carried that into this year, one of the top seeds in the NFC right now, you know, kind of right behind the Eagles there, right in that race in the NFC. Adding a guy like Bruce has got to be great for a team that has so many young guys, for a team that has so many guys that haven't had postseason success like he has. It's got to be great to have a guy like that in the organization for Detroit.
Yeah, and Bruce is kind of really, you know, not to down him at all, but he has matured into like an absolute, you know, superstar from where he came. And just to now the experience, the hard work, the dedication, the struggle and strife he's been through in his life, the absolute motivation he'll be able to bring to that Lions team coming in, you know, halfway through the season, really. You know, who knows, you know, him getting on and active, you know, they're probably going to see where he's at conditioning wise and whatnot. And, he could be playing on Sundays real quick here in the near future. I mean, it's absolutely crazy
for a team that is going to win their division and host a playoff game at least, you know?
Absolutely. And, you know, to come in with some, you know, fresh legs a little bit, he might have little cobwebs to dust off, but probably not many. And to come in and kind of just let him eat deal situation, not a bad deal for him.
I love it. He was drafted. When he entered the league, guys, that's back when you still had the more rigid jersey number code. Linebackers had to wear this number, D-line, O-line, et cetera, et cetera. That's why he had a 51. Well, now the Pandora's box is open. You can wear basically anything you want to wear. So to that end, I say, attention, Khalif Raymond. Give up your number 11. Come on, give up your number 11 with those Detroit Lions. Let's see Bruce Irvin in his last hurrah wearing that old WVU number 11 again. But Owen, I agree with you. A guy like that fits in any locker room, first of all. But I think Bruce Irvin and Dan Campbell are going to be two peas in a pod, right? I think that's a great addition. I think a presence of a guy like Bruce in any locker room is going to help him take a step forward. But when you can have a guy like that, just asking him to be a situational player, even more specialized and more situational than he was at the peak of his career, because he's always been a pass rush specialist. But when you can have a guy like that, that tells you you're just kind of cherry picking now. You don't have a lot of needs from a roster standpoint, and now you're just kind of dotting your I's, crossing a couple more T's, and here you go. But addition to a roster that kind of puts him in position, as strange as it may feel to say, the Detroit Lions are a legit Super Bowl contender. So let's go Lions.
Hey, they're 7-3. And like I said, I mean, you look at the rest of that division, Minnesota without Kirk Cousins. I mean, Josh Dobbs has done great for them the last couple of weeks, but I don't think they're going to keep pace with the Lions. The Packers and the Bears are a mess. Yes. I mean, that Detroit team, I think, and especially they're 7-3 right now. If you look at their schedule, it sets up pretty well down the back half. I mean, they could easily win 12 games, that Lions team, host a playoff game, maybe 2 if they can stack some wins there. So, yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on Bruce, and if he's able to get on that active roster and contribute with some fresh legs, like Big O said, I love it. You know, he was one of my favorite Mountaineers of all time. He was, you know, playing while I was in school. I'll never forget, you know, when he was drafted by Seattle 15th overall in 2012, Owen, you'll like this story. That was shortly after my 21st birthday. Okay. And after my 21st birthday, I lived in Sunnyside. when I was in school. And Mutts, I mean, I could have thrown a football from my front door and hit Mutts. I mean, that's how close I lived to Mutts. And so that was right around the time too, 2012, that they turned the NFL draft. It started to become more of a spectacle, and they started to make it an event, and it was multiple nights and all that stuff. And the first round, kind of its standalone thing and a big production. I remember being at Mutts for the first round of the NFL draft, and they've got the draft on all the TVs and the volumes cranked up, right? And everyone's kind of doing their thing and half paying attention to the draft and half hanging out. And you hear that doom, 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 doom. With the 15th pick in the 2012 NFL draft, the Seattle Seahawks select Bruce Irvin, West Virginia University. And it was like a bomb went off in Mutts. Like, it just turned into straight people are chucking their beers in the air. Everyone's screaming and yelling. The whole place is going, Bruce. It was one of those cool moments from my college career that I won't forget. So all the best to Bruce Irvin.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say all the best to Bruce Irvin, and we'll be rooting for you.
Yeah, Jeff Castile recognized what he had before Bruce even really settled into a full-time role and understood the big picture, what we were trying to do defensively. You couldn't help but see the raw talent. So here we were as an odd stack defense in a three-man configuration up front at the point of attack. And to Jeff's credit, what he did was he put in what we called the SWAT package. And then when we went to an even front just for third downs in the old Big East days, and that even front defense included Bruce off the edge. And some of the highlights that you remember from his days at West Virginia were in that SWAT package. And you just had to find a way. And Jeff recognized, look, even if he doesn't understand all the calls and all the plays, we got to get this guy on the field. Eventually he'll learn the rest, right? And of course he did. He settled into one of the greats, a Hall of Famer for all the right reasons. But he was just explosive. He was dynamic. And you recognize that from the first time he put on pads in Morgantown.
Bruce Irvin, Chris Neald, Julian Miller. I mean, that was a heck of a trio across that line.
Yeah, it sure was.
Yeah, that was a savage D front for sure.
They were a lot of fun to watch, and we'll be watching Bruce as he maybe gears up for one last run here with the Detroit Lions. Big thank you to Fortis for presenting this episode of In the Gun as well too. Shout out to our guy Rick Lewis for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. Make sure you visit fortis.us.com. Well, from a more recent Mountaineer legend in Bruce Irvin to an all-time Mountaineer legend in Don Nehlen. Gentlemen, his contributions to the university, to the football program, finally going to be immortalized on Saturday, as he will have his name placed in the diversified energy terrace there in the end zone. Ceremony for him. His name will go next to the greats, right? Rogers, Huff, Bosley, Talley, Major, Chuck Halley, just getting up there as well too at the BYU game. And, John Antonic, you mentioned this, Jed, wrote a really nice article on WVUsports.com, as he so often does. And I thought, I thought he said this really well in his article. He basically said, if you're talking about a Mountaineer football Mount Rushmore, that conversation that sports fans love to have. Hey, who's on your wide receiver Mount Rushmore? Who's on your New York Yankees Mount Rushmore? Who's on your Pittsburgh Steelers Mount Rushmore? If you're having that conversation about the Mountaineers, Don Nehlen has to be one of those guys, and it's going to be great to see him finally get that recognition and have his name, displayed in the stadium forever.
Yeah, it's a timeless honor, as it should be. And when you think back to some of the greats who have populated this program, since its inception, the Bruce Bosleys, the Darryl Tallies, I mean, all these great names that come to mind, there is that select few that somehow, some way, I'm not going to say as a cut above the rest, but as a cut deserving to be over top of Mountaineer Field for all of time. And of course, Don Nehlen is right there, if not even, I mean, maybe he should be up above looking down, kind of coaching those guys up in some way, right? But what Don Nehlen means different things to different people among the West Virginia fan base. And I kind of view him as, in many ways, he took us places that it seemed we couldn't possibly ever go. I mean, there always seemed to be a ceiling on what we could achieve as a program on the national scale. We'd been to a Sugar Bowl. Yeah, we had some bowl wins. Yeah, we had some moments. But we couldn't possibly play for a national championship, right? Well, not so fast, my friend. He goes unbeaten in 1988 with a Heisman finalist that he recruited and brought to town and made a quarterback when nobody else wanted to. I mean, all these different innovative things that he did and was responsible for. And then to do it again 5 years later, another unbeaten schedule. And again, it kind of instilled in us this belief that why not us? That never existed. I really don't think, at least on the level of consistency, until Don Nehlen got to town. I mean, we weren't really that recognizable of a brand. I mean, he's attached to the Flying WV logo itself. He's attached to the uniforms that we enjoyed for so many years and still do. When you're watching a Mountaineer game, you can kind of tell it's the Mountaineers because of Don Nehlen. That's one of the things he wanted. But guys, that's the way I recognize it. But you mentioned Antonik's article. I would certainly direct people. It goes back to his Schembechler days at Michigan and what Bo told Coach Nehlen before he took the job. Certainly go to WVUsports.com and check out John Antonik's article, because it does a great job of kind of chronicling the whole story. But it's going to be a cool moment. His first coaching job, Cincinnati. His first win at Mountaineer Field in 1980, Cincinnati. And he's going to be memorialized with Cincinnati in town. It's kind of neat.
No, it is. I'm glad you said that. I saw that in the article as well too. That is pretty cool. His first coaching job as an assistant was at Cincinnati. His first game when he was head coach at WVU was against Cincinnati. And November 18th was also his final game that he coached at Mountaineer Field back in 2000 against East Carolina. And this is all going to happen on November 18th. Sometimes it's just really cool how that stuff comes together. And going to be special when Don Nehlen gets that immortalization that he so richly deserves Saturday afternoon at Mountaineer Field. If you are there, make sure you're screaming your tail off, you're clapping and making some noise for Coach Nehlen when he gets. I think Sean said the ceremony was going to be at the end of the first quarter, but whenever it is,
typically that's when they do that. Yeah.
Typically that's when they do that type of stuff. So a very cool kind of full circle moment there with a lot of that backdrop as well too, and that will be a special moment on Saturday at the final home game of this season. That home game is against the Cincinnati Bearcats, a team that we used to be familiar with for a long time in the Big East, went away for a little bit. Now they're back. We've got another East Coast time zone opponent, which we know Jed loves. Finally, an opponent, too, that we have a little history, at least, more distant history with than the last decade or so that we've spent with some of these Big 12 teams. We will get into the Bearcats, their first year in the conference, when we return on the other side. You are in the gun.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
For more West Virginia Mountaineer football content, be sure to follow us on Twitter at In the Gun Podcast.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
Let's go, Mountaineer fans. You're tuned in to In the Gun with Wes, the Runaway Beer Truck, and the Signal Caller.
Back in the gun here as we get ready to preview the Cincinnati Bearcats. Like I said, a familiar foe in a lot of different ways. border state with West Virginia, a team that we used to share a conference with in the Big East days. Once again, we do now in the Big 12. This is their first year, obviously, in the conference. We know they're struggling a little bit. New coaching staff, right? Luke Fickell leaves and goes to Wisconsin. Working in a new coaching staff right when you're heading into a new conference, that was always going to be tough sledding, and it has been for Cincinnati so far this season. But make no mistake about it, they are certainly a team that has some really good players, some dangerous elements. And Jed, I gotta think, so often as it always does, and particularly with how we know this WVU offense wants to operate, it starts in the trenches, right? But the 5-star matchup to keep an eye on in this one is that WVU offensive line against that Bearcats front, right? As much as they've struggled, they might. You could make an argument they've got the best, or certainly one of the 2 or 3 best defensive fronts in the entire conference.
Yeah, and more specifically on the interior of that battle with West Virginia's offensive line against Cincinnati's defensive line. They're very productive. They're very talented. You had a situation with a new coaching staff and Scott Satterfield, who you've heard Neil talk about it. He has a history with Scott Satterfield when Scott Satterfield was at Appy State and Neil Brown was at Troy. But he came in, and of course, one of the things you have to do when you take the job is to assemble your staff. And people were wondering what he was going to look like on the defensive side of the football, what he retained, what he had at Louisville, because they did a bang-up job at Louisville on the defensive side of the football. Well, certainly he did. Brian Brown, as D coordinator at Louisville, came with him. And Brian Brown did a terrific job at Louisville for him. When you look at the production, they led the nation in sacks last year. They had 50 sacks. So that's the style that you see Cincinnati building towards. But from a scheme standpoint, Brown himself has kind of described his scheme as, yes, they're a 3-4 team. Yes, they're an odd front team, but they kind of have principles that are similar to a 4-2-5 defense. And the reason he says that is they always have 5 defensive backs on the field. Now, of course, one of those defensive backs is the star position hybrid, which just about everybody has some version of their hybrid in today's modern game. You have to. But for the last several years under Luke Fickell, they were an odd stack defense. Now, the good news is when you step into town and you're taking over, now none of these schemes are identical, but it's easier to go from a transition standpoint from an odd stack to a 3-4 in the sense that you're used to having odd front defensive personnel. Now you get to the second level, it changes up because you're not going to have the same backers and the same skill set and all that. But from a point of attack standpoint, yeah, the guys that you're going to be talking about, all starts with Dante Corleone. Owen, they're 2 most talented, 2 most explosive, and I think 2 most NFL ready guys are the guys that they have on the interior. Corleone's a guy that's a handful. He's 6'2", 318 pounds, but he doesn't play at 318 pounds other than his strength. He's very quick. He's very explosive. He's very strong, incredible pad leverage, an incredible first step, and just violent hands. And next to him is a 6'2", another kid that's pushing 300 pounds, Jawan Briggs, 297 pounds. And those 2 on the interior of that defensive line have given a lot of people fits. And you might think, well, if they're giving it fits, how can Cincinnati be 3-7? Well, it's not because people have gashed them in the run game. Guys, we talked about it. When we watched Oklahoma State do to them in the run game what we did, what was the point that we made the following week after that game? Hey, Oklahoma State just ran for 300 yards on Cincinnati, and nobody this year has yet run for more than 125. That's how difficult that is to do. We even made that point the week after that game. These guys have been difficult to run on. When you look at their production, they hang around the top of the league, at least in that conversation, among the best defenses from a total yardage standpoint. They're 4th. From a pass defense standpoint, again, they'll get after you, they'll pressure you. They're 5th. And from a rush defensive standpoint, they're 5th. So they kind of keep them hanging around. And in large measure, they do it with that talented defensive front. They got a couple edge guys that'll get after you too. These are really, your hands are so full, guys. You don't want to have that pocket collapse from the interior. And sometimes you have to commit so many resources to helping prevent that. that it clears up those edge guys, and Eric Phillips, and they got Greasiak, who has 13 hurries as well. Those are the guys who are getting after you and piling up bigger numbers. Sometimes what Corleone's doing and what Briggs is doing doesn't necessarily surface on the stat sheet quite as much. But here's the deal, guys. If you can find time to try and pick on their back end, especially their corners, you might be able to make some hay. But the difficulty is finding that time. You're going to have to sometimes max protect. You're going to have to keep a tight end in. The backs are going to have to be activated in the pass protection game and be very physical when they do it, not just show up and pretend. I mean, you're truly going to have some double teams and some chips and some help from the tight ends and the backs, in addition to the O-line, because when you look at some of the things people have been able to do or tried to do on their back end defensively, let's start with this. Justin Harris, he's a 6 foot, 195-pound kid. He's going to wear number 12. He's one of their corners. He's been flagged 6 times for defensive pass interference. That's the most in all of Power 5. He's a very grabby kid. He doesn't use his body leverage nearly as well when the ball's in flight. He sometimes kind of gets out of sorts. He's been targeted 36 times. He's allowed 19 catches for 166 yards. But what you see on tape, when the ball's in flight, he's not extremely comfortable. It's kind of what we sometimes look like in West Virginia last year with the ball in flight and those struggles that we had. And we talk about how low our pass defended numbers were a year ago. So that's point number one. Now, if you go to the other corner, Jordan Young has been flagged 4 times. So that's 10 DPIs between their 2 starting corners. But more than that, Jordan Young has surrendered in coverage 584 yards. That is the most in the entire nation among all defenders. So again, they're somewhat liable on the perimeter on the back end if you have time to force the issue there. But the issue is it doesn't necessarily sync up in terms of their defensive line or their front 7 at large allowing that time. So it's going to take a lot of that, and keep an eye on Deshaun Pace. That's the hybrid kid. They'll bring him off the edge. They'll sometimes hover him in space. He'll find a void in zone coverage. He'll man you up in man coverage. So he's kind of a Swiss Army knife for this defense, and he is that star hybrid defensive back. He's going to be flying around wearing number 3. He's 6'2", 212 pounds, kind of a undersized back or oversized safety, physical kid, but also has some coverage skills. But you'll see some guys go after him as well. I mean, sometimes if you can find the time to isolate him with a certain matchup, you can make some plays. He's allowed 4 touchdowns in coverage. But the issue is getting to these guys. But again, the defensive line is kind of the straw that stirs this entire drink. I mean, they're going to try and find ways to, and they're very good. You know how we always talk about Andrew Jackson doing a great job with our snap count defensively. Well, I think the same thing can be said for what their defensive staff is doing with their guys. Dante Corleone, 370 snaps. Jawan Briggs, 369. Great job kind of governing how much those guys play to keep them fresh. So we'll get into when we talk about their offense, the challenge we're going to have from a keep away standpoint, because now it's kind of a fair fight. We're facing a team that's going to try and do the same thing to us. So, yeah, there's going to be some challenges there. But again, you ask yourself, well, how are they 3-7? Well, there's deficiencies outside of what I'm talking about. Sometimes people have found a way to pass pro long enough and pick on those corners. Sometimes people have isolated that star safety and coverage. Sometimes people have even had success when you get to the second and third level because they will roll the dice. Remember what Oklahoma was a year ago, but didn't look like last week? They would gamble downhill with those run fits and sometimes miss. They had 12 TFLs in Morgantown last year, but they also give up a lot of big plays. That's more in keeping with right now what you see in Cincinnati, because, again, bear in mind, Brian Brown, this isn't a finished product. Their defensive coordinator is going to continue to work this, and they're going to recruit to this specific scheme. And it's going to continue to improve in the years to come. But right now, just being cast the hand he was dealt, he's done a pretty good job with fitting these pieces, particularly those NFL pieces right up front on the interior. Think Texas Tech in the sense that it's difficult to get movement on these guys and shove them around. And that creates a lot of other possibilities with what they can do defensively.
Big dog.
Wow. I was slightly distracted during that, Jed, and I apologize. I had sent a text message to Jason this week because, of course, he was a Bearcat. And
That's true. Did you see the picture, Owen, that surfaced this week? Did you see the picture?
What was that?
Travis and Jason, the picture. Did you see the picture that surfaced this week? The old picture of them playing at Cincinnati?
Oh, yeah, both of them.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to send that to you. They look like goofy 18-year-olds. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Oh,
one's
yeah,
a finalist,
both of them
finalist for world's sexiest man, and the other one's
Hey, but that's what I just
Swift.
said. Hey,
Did you send the picture?
Said that to him. I said, hey, big dog, how's the body holding up? He's like, man, after it feels great after the bye. Coach has been taking care of me. I said, man, you earned it. I said, I'm sure it also feels great that you're the sexiest man alive as well, and also known as his boyfriend's brother. Oh man, he is just. There's
picture.
no
We'll send it
ceiling
to
for those
Skylar.
guys, dude. I love it, man. I absolutely.
Hey,
love
Owen,
it,
text that picture to Skylar.
I love what those guys are doing right now.
We'll have to
love
throw it up here on the. Oh,
I said,
fantastic.
we're gonna throw down on a bet. He said, nah, man, I'm not touching any part of that this year. So, but no, Jed, honestly, stingy D up front, we're gonna have our hands full.
Yeah, we are.
As far as the O-line go, this is gonna be another good test for Zach and that bunch, and really, this could be, a week we really legitimize our run game as a whole and who we are, by putting up those numbers that we have consistently all year.
So we always talk about the situations that might arise. Okay. Now, when you look at third down, it's kind of an even matchup. We're both middle of the pack. Our offense, their defense, and third down production, the Big 12. The thing that might jump out is, even though we haven't been as effective in the last couple of weeks, West Virginia is still fourth in the red zone in the Big 12 in touchdown production at 64%. Cincinnati has kind of struggled when the field shrinks for whatever strange reason, and it was nothing that I could really see on tape that stuck out, but 62% touchdowns allowed. So they're 11th in the Big 12 in that category. That's one of the areas that they haven't fared nearly as well, but that's the one thing I would add.
Well, okay. So we know the defensive line is legit. We know there's some opportunity for the secondary there. What's this all translate to? Is this a bounce back game for Garrett? Is this another ground and pound game? What's the, if you're calling the signals there, Jed, what's the what's at least the opening script look like? How you want to test that defense?
Well, we tried to get this rolling last week against Oklahoma, but the game just spiraled out of control so quickly that it wasn't a factor. But I wouldn't be surprised if we asked Garrett to become more engaged in the run game again. Because that's one of the things when I watch tape on these guys, you do have to kind of force them to play 11 on 11. And if opportunities are to be made, whether it was John Reese Plumlee at UCF, or even Donovan Smith at times in the Houston game. I mean, athletic quarterbacks are some of what you got to do. You got to utilize that to make any kind of hay at all on the ground against these guys, because that's a way to breach the perimeter. That's a way to test their eye discipline. Because that's the thing, Owen, when I look at Corleone, probably more specifically than Briggs, not only is he all those things, but his eye discipline's incredible. I mean, you'll see people try and counter them, and he recognizes that so quickly. So you better engage and leverage him. So you're going to have to use all those resources, including Garrett in the run game, including jet sweep action. You're going to have a lot of moving parts, testing the perimeter, anything to move you outside so you can kind of pick your spots on the interior as you try and wear them down. But we talk about deep balls. Well, from a fundamental standpoint and a technician standpoint, Neil's talked about it. Look, Garrett, there's some things he needs to improve on, or he's always just going to be that 50% passer. If some of those things can improve, there are some opportunities. We've seen him make those plays down the field. He is a gifted deep ball thrower, as long as his fundamentals are sound. We push the envelope in the vertical pass game. We continue to do that. we've seen him consistently do that. Matter of fact, when you look at it, we average, I think Garrett's average per attempt is higher than any other quarterback's air yards in the Big 12. We're really trying to force the issue downfield with some of what we're doing. In other words, 24% of Garrett's pass attempts have been 20-plus yards downfield, and that's the most in the Big 12. As a team, our average attempt in the air, our throw depth, is 11 yards, and that's tied for the highest in the Big 12 and second highest in Power 5. So it's not for lack of effort pushing the football vertical, trying to test things like these opportunities we talked about with these Cincy corners. But what you can't do is you can't be doing it from a position of desperation. You're going to have to be doing it from a clean platform and a clean pocket and take those shots accordingly. But that's kind of what it's going to have to be. We talk about the plays that Garrett's made at his best in the pass game. He still forced more missed tackles than any quarterback in the league, and the fifth most in all Power 5. That's what we're going to have to see. He's going to have to get back to playing the style of football that we saw, for instance, against Central Florida, against BYU. So we're going to need him against this very talented defensive line Cincinnati's going to bring to town. And that's kind of what I see, guys, is because I don't like the third down matchup. I mean, I think they do some creative things on third down. I mean, they'll really press you and test you. But you got to stay on schedule. And I don't see a way to do that without Garrett being a critical part of the run game. We're also going to have some moments where we just push them around and win some of those battles. But it's going to be a clash of titans, guys. I mean, right there at the point of attack over the football, Zach Frazier, Dante Corleone, it's going to be a clash of titans. Here's two guys that, for all intents and purposes, should be playing on Sundays for the next decade or longer. And it's going to be worth the price of admission just to kind of small ball it and pay more attention to what's going on the interior. You know, as Pat Kerwin likes to say, take your eye off the ball. Well, once the ball snapped, the fun stuff's really going to take place at the point of attack with Zach Frazier and Dante Corleone.
Yeah, Jed, it kind of reminds me, you know, we had a similar conversation leading up to the Penn State game, just in the sense of, for a lot of these WVU offensive linemen, and Zach is at the forefront of that, but, you know, Wyatt and Doug as well, too, guys that, you know, that want to play on Sundays and have a chance to have careers in the National Football League. That there was a lot of matchups in that Penn State game that you were saying, right? This is one the scouts are going to cut on. Like, they're going to want to see good on good, you know, two guys that are going to be invited to the combine and going to be drafted against each other and see how you do. I think this is another one of those, certainly for Zach and for Dante. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
It might as well be a Senior Bowl big on big Oklahoma drill. Right. I mean, because that's the type of environment these guys are going to move forward and find themselves in. So it's one of those rare opportunities, Owen, that Zach, as revered as he already is, has an opportunity to improve his stock against Dante Corleone. And Dante Corleone, as revered as he is, has a chance to improve his stock against Zach Frazier. So what more could you ask for?
Yeah, absolutely. Battle big on big, baby. I'm ready for it. This Saturday is going to be, you know, like I said, that's where the money's made. That's where the money's made for these guys. Season's coming to a close for unfortunately, you know, it's senior night as well. So, you know, last time Mountaineer Field, a lot of different feelings, probably a lot of emotions going through. I'm hoping that we're going to bounce back, you know, and especially those guys up front from the showing they had last night. It's the last game they're ever going to play there. So, you know, I look to see those guys having a little bit extra mustard coming out there on the game field. And, you know, if Neil and the staff kind of does the thing right with, you know, kind of pumping up Coach Neal and giving that kind of speech, win one for the Gipper there, you know, I can see a little bit extra sauce action coming out on Saturday.
I'm all for it. Sign me up.
I'm all for it as well, too, especially for those West Virginia boys who know how much Coach Nealon meant to the program and to the state. That's well said, Big O. All right, Jed, before we spin the block here, a thank you to Toothman Ford, our guy JR, for presenting In the Gun, as always, too. We all know cars cost less in Grafton, so get your butts to Grafton for all of your vehicle needs. They support this podcast. They support dozens of our athletes with NIL. Big shout out to Toothman Ford and a big thank you for them being a presenting sponsor of ITG. As always, All right, Jed, other side of the gun, other side of the equation, spin the block, Cincinnati offense against the WVU defense. What stands out? Where's this matchup begin?
Well, Scott Satterfield, his pedigrees on the offensive side of the football, long history, very well respected offensive coach. He was part of that Appy State staff back in the day that pulled the shocker at Michigan. And he actually, back when he was first at Appy State as a play caller, they were running a lot of option out of the eye and a lot of kind of old school stuff. Some of the stuff that he even ran when he played at App State. But what they did was they bounced around visiting different staffs around the country and tried to see what they thought they could do to differentiate themselves and maybe become a giant slayer. And one of the staffs they visited was West Virginia with Rich in the early 2000s. And they picked Rich's brain and liked a lot of what he was doing with his tempo. And so they took a lot of their inside and tight zone stuff and really paired that with Rich's tempo. And they lifted that idea and took some other ideas and built from it and created this identity that would ultimately become the Scott Satterfield offense that we now know and recognize and everybody appreciates. And many years later, he's still run a lot of those same concepts. He still approaches things the same way from a flow of the game standpoint. And when you've seen him at his best, he's a handful. I mean, at Appy State, again, Neil tangled with him and encountered some of those offenses. When he gets a dual threat quarterback, that's when this guy is really humming because his system kind of fits that and it caters to the skills of a guy like that. So whether it was Appy State, I mean, I remember guys like Taylor Lamb or Zach Thomas. I mean, they were very productive in the throw game, but they were also like 500-yard rushers back in the day. So guys that can really hurt you and burn the candle from both ends. And really, when you look at what he did at Louisville, perfectly in sync with his entire time at Louisville was Malik Cunningham. You talk about a dual threat weapon. Well, it's not easy to follow in the shoes of Lamar Jackson, but Malik Cunningham did a pretty good job of doing it at Louisville as a 4-year starter for Scott Satterfield. And this is a kid who in Scott Satterfield's system threw for 9,000 and some odd yards, ran for 2,500 yards. Guys, he rushed for 45 touchdowns. That's the kind of production that the quarterback spot you can expect when Scott Satterfield's offense is humming on all cylinders. And so in the offseason, it was kind of a big get when he brought in Emory Jones, former SEC starter at Florida, who lost the job, transferred to Arizona State. So he bounced around again, jumped back in the portal. This is a guy who's a legit dual threat. I mean, he can tuck it and go. He can truly hurt you in the run game. Talk about a guy who forces you to play 11-on-11 football. Well, he absolutely certainly does that. And at their best, they're going to have a controlled passing game, pick their shots, but run the football effectively, not just with the quarterback, but the guy that's kind of leading the way is Corey Kiner. This is another guy that he was a former Mr. Football in Ohio, ended up signing with LSU, played quite a bit at LSU, and transfers back home to play for Cincinnati. And now he's a burgeoning star. He's on the cusp of a 1,000-yard season. He's been consistently productive for them all year. They've really leaned on him to play the style of football that they want to embrace. And the engine that makes their run game go, when you study them on tape, what stands out is, speak of the interior of the offensive line, their guards. They got a right guard in Luke Condra and a left guard in D'Artagnan Tinsley, and they both are just maulers. They're road graders. They're a handful. So they kind of set the table for all the things that these guys try and do from a production standpoint. Now, there's some leakage there. There's some leakage. Again, if they're not quite on the script that they want to follow, you can penetrate, you can be disruptive, you can knock them off schedule with some TFLs. I'm not as sold on their tackles. And even you can get to the quarterback, you can get to Emory Jones, especially if you put them behind the sticks. He's been sacked, 24 times, 23 times. I think I did the math on this, guys, to give you some sense of it. He's been sacked 24 as a team, 23 have been Emory Jones. He's sacked once every 12 pass attempts. Compare that to Garrett, once every 53 pass attempts. So that gives you some sense of how they've struggled in trying to protect. But when you look at some of the deficiencies outside of that, On the offensive line, they got a tackle in DeAndre Buford. He's number 56. He doesn't necessarily hold up on tape, guys. That's a guy that really struggles, and the metrics back that up. He has a lot of blown blocks. He's been beaten a lot, not just in the pass game, but in the run game. So there's going to be some opportunities on the edges of that offensive line, not so much as the interior. But the thing that alarms me, if I'm to look at this and scrutinize it further, here's the thing that jumps out. It's kind of a tale of two teams. We talked about this last year with BYU. This is an inverted version of that. For whatever strange reason, they have played pretty good football on the road. They're 3-7 overall. They're 2-2 on the road. Okay. Now, let's look at the why behind that. On the road, in road games only, they've averaged 235 yards rushing. That's number one in the Big 12 on the road. So they're the best road rushing team in the Big 12. On the road, 44% conversion rate on third down, tied for number one in the Big 12. So when you can run the football and you can win on third down, what's that translate to? Number three, 34 minutes and 18 seconds average time of possessions on the road. Number one in the Big 12. Here we go, guys. That's our playing card. That's our go-to. Here's a team that's going to try and do to us what we do to everybody else. Bully us, play keep away, take the air out of the game. Now, they'll try and drag you into an ugly football game. In some ways, they kind of remind me of what we were early in the season before our offense hit its stride. Remember those games where we're winning ugly? That's the style of game they want to drag you into because the production's not all there. 4 rush touchdowns on the road. That's the fewest in the Big 12. They're not a really productive red zone team, 42% touchdowns in the red zone, worst in the Big 12. But they've consistently run the football. Here's their 4 road games: 216 yards rushing at Pitt, 242 at BYU. Even in the blowout loss at Oklahoma State, they ran for 277. Last week's win at Houston, they ran for 204. So every time out on the road, they've run the football. So I think what they're leaning into, the old adage that 2 things travel well, that's a solid run game and a solid defense. I think that Satterfield's been around long enough to understand that. And he's really, especially on the road, when they leave Cincinnati, trying to lean into that and take advantage of it. And I do think that by and large, that is exactly the type of game plan we can expect from them. A lot of ground and pound, a lot of 11-on-11 football game where they activate the quarterback, run him, get the most that they can out of him. Corey Kiner, we're going to see a heavy, heavy dose of Corey Kiner, especially on that inside zone. Oh, and those guards really are in sync on that inside zone. They have some weapons on the perimeter, so they will take some shots. A lot of transfers on this football team, and that's to be expected. First-year head coach, that kind of roster transition, even more than normal in today's game. So that's to be expected. One of them is Xavier Henderson, big 6'3" target on the perimeter. They target him way more than anybody else. Braden Smith is going to get some targets. D. Wiggins, another big-bodied kid. They got a tight end in Mateer. They like to go to him. So there are some weapons that they will try and move around and configure things. But, yeah, we got to find a way to win the battle of attrition. It's going to be a staring match and a battle in the trenches. They're going to try and play the same style of football that we do. So now more so than ever, if we can get a couple of those big plays against those corners we talked about, get an early lead. They're not a football team that's necessarily built to come from behind like us, right? So I think advantage to whoever gets an early lead in this football game. If you can get up by a couple scores, that kind of knocks them out of sorts, because when you can force them to be a little more one-dimensional than they like to be in terms of throwing the football, that's not Emory Jones at his best. I mean, when you look at the number of times they've thrown the football in their wins, and their 3 wins, he's thrown it 23 times, 26 times, and 16 times. When you can get him up into the lower mid-30s or even 40 times throwing the football, they're way out of sorts in terms of what they're comfortable doing. So that all starts with a fast start, but that's some of the challenges I see, Owen. 2 big hosses at those guard spots, anchoring them down. They're going to throw some inside zone at you. Corey Connor's going to try and lean on you. He's physical, he's explosive, and you're going to have a handful trying to corral Emory Jones at the quarterback run game.
Yeah, we're going to have to play some of that front, the D-line front that we had kind of at the beginning of the season when they were really playing well, and hopefully Cutter and Koba, have a lights out game, sideline to sideline. Secondary, hopefully they can pick it up, but it's gonna be a brute. This is a good battle, man. This is a decent game when we played them back in the Big East days, and they were always known for a physical, tough team, even back then when we played them in the Big East. So looking forward to the matchup. I mean, it's going to be an upfront battle. That's what it's going to be. Like you said, both kind of same quarterbacks. So who can really make the leader make the most mistakes?
Yeah, that's what it's going to come down to. And they're going to have a good plan defensively. They're going to have a good plan with what Satterfield's going to dial up on the offensive side. They're going to want to play keep away. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're in their staff meeting saying the same thing I just said. Guys, if we can get a fast start, if we can get up by 10 or 14, okay, we can kind of put them in a position of desperation and get them out of their element. They're saying the same things. It's kind of like, to some extent, it's like looking in the mirror, especially looking in the mirror of the way we were playing football earlier in the year. So they built this thing up, and now they got. It's nice to snap a losing streak, right? I mean, they dropped 7 straight. They hadn't beaten anybody since they beat Pitt early in the year until last week when they went to Houston. So now they got the monkey off their back. They got that losing streak behind them. They have a little bit of belief. They finally chalked up that first Big 12 conference win, whether it was against an old American Conference counterpart or not. So now it's a little bit of proof of concept, and a coaching staff always likes, hey, I told you this would work. Now you saw it last week work. Let's just continue down this path. Once more on the road. Let's go. Hey, we're not a bad road football team. Let's go and make it 3-2. We're already 2-2. Forget that 3-7 stuff. One more place. Let's go into Mountaineer Field. Tough place to win. Let's go steal one there and show this conference what we're all about as we build this thing up. So there's some things as they're building this program, whether they're out of bowl eligibility or not, a lot of things to play for as they work towards some momentum to try and build into the offseason.
Yeah, and we've seen that. We saw that from the Mountaineers last year, right? That carried into this year, I think. And you're right. It's always important to finish a season strong, to carry momentum into your offseason. And Jed, I agree with you that the start in this one feels pretty important. Which team can kind of dictate the terms out of the gate? And that at least gives me some confidence because, correct me if I'm wrong, right? We've scored opening touchdowns in our last 3 games. I know we did against Oklahoma. I know we did against BYU, and I'm pretty sure we did against UCF as well. Or did we settle for 3 on that opening drive against UCF?
That's right. Well, you're
points on your opening drive at least.
Yes, and they did the same thing last week at Houston. So that's one of the things when I watched the tape, I noticed their first drive was very efficient, well scripted, kind of like ours was. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's who blinks first, right? I mean, that's part of what that's going to come down to. So that's a great point on your part, because that's one of the things I wanted to mention is they started playing really efficient football on the road right out of the gates of Houston. I like the script they had together to attack that Houston defense, and so there's something to be said for that. But
well, Jed, as we start to wrap this thing up, anything on special teams that stands out to you?
Well, again, in a battlefield position, which you kind of figure on some level this is going to play into that. All right. Ollie Straw, this is the type of game that if you pin them inside the 10 a couple times, pin them inside the 20 4 times, and tilt that hidden yardage in our direction, or for that matter, Preston Fox can sneak off an 18-yard return. I mean, those are the types of pennies that you might need to stack. And I could see this being a game where the winner gets into the mid-20s, and you might spend the better part of a quarter trading blows back and forth, but the field position doesn't change. You have the ball around midfield and have to punt a couple times before finally something happens and somebody's back breaks. And so, yeah, I think that from a special team standpoint, that's kind of what's going to matter. Ollie needs to bring his best and win the battle of coffin corner kicks, and because every yard's going to matter. And if you can do that sort of thing, I think that'll be one more thing that alters, because you got a couple pretty good place kickers too. So that's what I'm looking at. But the only thing I would add, Wes, is not that it matters. It's neither here nor there, but it always intrigues me to look back at previous matchups, even in a past life. Neil faced Scott Satterfield 3 times when he was at Troy. Interestingly enough, Neil's first year, that rebuild year in 2015, one of the signature games that nobody saw coming was they snuck up on Appy State and almost beat them in a 44-41 shootout, and that really turned that Troy team into believers. And that kind of paved the way for what was to come in those 3 consecutive 10-win seasons. But they fell 44-21 there, despite Troy outgaining them in that game. And then the next year, Troy upset them. I think, guys, that was, if I'm not mistaken, that win over Troy, or excuse me, Troy's win over Appy State in year 2 between Neil and Satterfield might have been the game that propelled Troy into the top 25 for the first time in school history. And then they didn't play a year, and then they finished kind of with like a lot on the line in terms of the conference championship, and Troy's starting quarterback was out. So in this ugly defensive slugfest up in the mountains in Boone, Appy State won 21-10. But these are the types of things. A lot of these memories were coming back as I was doing kind of a post-mortem on Neil at Troy, and I was remembering some of these storylines from those Appy State games then. But not that it matters a whole lot now. It's just different staffs, different rosters. But philosophically, I think there's still a lot of parallels between what Scatterfield likes to do, what Neil Brown likes to do. So that's why I think it's interesting to look back on some of those things.
Yeah. Hey, tendencies are always important. That past is always important, and 2 coaches that are familiar with with each other. We'll see how that plays out on Saturday. Certainly, it's gonna be a fun one. Listen, I know the weather. It's November weather. It's students are on break. You're close to Thanksgiving. You got high school football games to go to. You got some hunting that you want to do. All this stuff. I get it. But it's the last home game of the season. All right. It's an opportunity to get to 7 wins, still with another game to go. You got Don Nealon getting immortalized at the end of the first quarter. Let's listen. I know things didn't go the way we wanted to. It wasn't the showing we wanted last week in Norman, but there's still a big opportunity to end this season with good vibes, with a better taste in our mouth. And that starts 2:30 Saturday against Cincinnati, an old foe as well too. Where's Keith Tandy when you need him to go out there and knock JD Woods on his keister, baby? Come on.
Oh, and that's
JD Woods, DJ Woods, whatever his initials were.
What West was just talking about. I mean, think about it. If you go to a Mountaineer game, I don't know what your age might be. If you go 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, or 50 years from now, and you bring your kids back, your grandkids, whoever it might be, you are forever going to see Don Nealon's name above that terrace, looking down on the action on the field. Saturday's your chance to be able to say for the rest of your living days, I was there the day they put that up. The day that happened, I was there. And it was pretty cool. And you'll have that story for the rest of your life. It's not often going into a game, you're going to walk out with a story to tell the rest of your life. Normally, you're kind of rolling the dice. And if something cool happens, you'll have a story. If you were at the 05 Louisville game, you didn't plan on having a story the rest of your life, Owen, but now everybody has a story the rest of their life. But this is one that you kind of know going in, hey, there's something I'll have to talk about from this football game for the rest of my life. And that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and he's been a staple of West Virginia football for a very long time. He's meant a lot to the program. He's meant a lot to the university. He's meant a lot to the state. Just quick story about Coach Nealon before we get out of here. When that debacle happened with Rich, Joe Manchin and Coach Nealon came and spoke with the team and kind of, just kind of put their arms around us and just kind of let us know that, this whole state's behind you. So Coach Nealon, and every time I see Coach Nealon, he always gives me a big smile and says, you definitely could have played for me. So it's always a cool thing seeing him, and for him to get enshrined in Mountaineer history is as it should be.
Well said. Yeah, I think that's the best way to wrap it up there, without a doubt, as it should be. Don Nealon going to be enshrined where he belongs. Saturday afternoon, be there or be square. Final home game of the year. Last time till Labor Day weekend that we'll get a chance to be back there. So have some fun, enjoy it while it's gone, and let's get the ball rolling here to finish the season strong. Two wins to close this thing out in the regular season, and hopefully a fun bowl game to sink our teeth into in a couple weeks. as well. Gentlemen, this was a lot of fun. Thanks to all of our presenting sponsors. As always, thanks to our guy Skylar for putting this together. Make sure you're all getting involved in our weekly pick'em in the YouTube comments and on our Twitter account is where you can find that link as well too. And this is not it for the week. Obviously, tomorrow we've got Phil Steele Friday coming up. Can't wait to see what Phil thinks about this one between two old Big East foes. So make sure you're subscribing on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, in the gun. That's where you find us. And the one thing we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. For the Signal Caller Jed Drenning and the Beer Truck Owen Schmidt, I'm Wesley Euler. Thanks for listening, everybody. Let's go beat the Bearcats. You've been in the gun.